The Galactic Council chamber was filled with representatives from 200 different alien species when they passed Resolution 7749. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would be restricted to exactly 12 star systems and no more. The council members believed this was generous. They believed humans should be grateful for even this much space. Ambassador Zarel of the Korthan species stood tall as he announced the decision to the human delegation. His voice carried across the chamber with absolute authority and confidence. Captain Jake Morrison sat in the human section and listened to every word. His face showed nothing, no anger, no disappointment, no surprise. He simply nodded once when the announcement finished. Beside him sat Governor Helen Price and Admiral Richard Cole. They also remained quiet. The other council members noticed this silence and mistook it for acceptance. They thought the humans understood their place now. They thought the matter was settled. Jake stood and spoke only 7 words before leaving the chamber. His voice was calm and clear. He said thank you for making this easy, and then he walked out. The human delegation followed him without another word. The council members looked at each other with satisfaction. They had handled the human problem perfectly. The aggressive and unpredictable species had been put in their place without any conflict. They congratulated themselves on their wisdom. 3 days later, the first human ships began leaving Earth. Not military vessels at first. Civilian transports, family shuttles, colony ships, cargo haulers. They lifted off from every spaceport on the planet in a steady stream that never stopped. The departure was organized with perfect precision. Every ship knew exactly where to go and when to launch. There was no panic, no chaos, just millions of humans leaving their homeworld in complete silence. Lieutenant Amy Chen worked the navigation console aboard the Wayward Star as it prepared to depart. She had been born on Earth. She had never imagined leaving it forever. But when Jake Morrison gave the order to begin the exodus, she did not hesitate. None of them did. The crew worked with quiet efficiency. They had trained for this moment even though they had hoped it would never come. Jake stood on the bridge and watched Earth grow smaller in the view screen. The planet that had given birth to humanity was being abandoned, not because humans were weak, not because they were defeated, but because they chose to leave rather than accept the chains the council wanted to place on them. This was not surrender. This was something else entirely. Something the council would not understand until it was too late. Down on Earth's surface, Administrator Paul Grant oversaw the final shutdown procedures. He stood in the Central Command Facility beneath New York and watched the status boards. Every human settlement across the planet was going dark. Every factory was being dismantled. Every database was being wiped clean. Every piece of advanced technology was being removed or destroyed. The council had wanted to limit humanity. Instead, they would inherit empty buildings and silent cities. Sergeant Lisa Hayes approached Paul with a datapad. Her expression was professional, but he could see the emotion behind her eyes. She reported that the last civilian shuttle was ready for departure. Paul looked around the command center one final time. Humans had built this facility. Humans had reached for the stars from this world. Now they were leaving it all behind. Paul gave the order to initiate the global shutdown protocol. Within minutes, every power grid on Earth began shutting down. The lights of cities that had burned for centuries went dark. Communication satellites stopped broadcasting. Defense platforms powered down. Earth was going silent in every possible way. No signals, no lights, no signs of life. Just an empty world that humans no longer wanted. The last shuttle lifted off from New York just as the sun was setting. Paul sat in the passenger section and looked out the window. He could see the city below him fading into darkness. Soon there would be nothing left but ruins and memories. The council observers in orbit reported what they were seeing with growing confusion. They had expected protests. They had expected humans to beg for reconsideration. They had not expected this complete and total withdrawal. Across human space, the pattern repeated itself. Every colony world was being evacuated. Every orbital station was being abandoned. Every military base was being emptied. Humans packed everything they could carry and destroyed everything they could not. They left nothing useful behind. Nothing the council could claim as prize or profit. The exodus took 6 weeks to complete. Millions of ships carrying billions of humans departed from dozens of worlds. They gathered at rally points beyond council sensor range. Military vessels formed protective screens around the civilian convoys. Supply ships distributed resources. Command ships coordinated the massive movement of people and materials. It was the largest migration in galactic history, and it happened almost without sound. Jake Morrison commanded the exodus from the bridge of the Wayward Star. He received reports from every sector of human space. Every evacuation proceeded according to plan. There were no accidents, no ships left behind, no humans remained in Council territory. They had practiced this evacuation in secret for 2 years, since the moment they realized the Council would never accept humanity as equals. Helen Price worked beside Jake, coordinating the civilian convoys. She had been governor of the Mars colony before the Exodus. Now she helped organize the movement of entire populations to a destination that most humans did not even know yet. They trusted their leaders. They trusted the plan. They believed that leaving was better than staying under Council restrictions. The Council observers continued sending reports back to their governments. They described the human exodus with clinical detachment. They estimated that humanity was fleeing into the outer darkness beyond mapped space. They calculated that without support infrastructure, the humans would face enormous challenges. Many Council species believed humanity would be extinct within a generation. Others thought the humans would eventually return begging for assistance. None of them understood what was really happening. Humanity was not fleeing in panic. They were executing a strategic withdrawal. They were leaving behind a civilization that did not want them, and heading toward a future they would build themselves, without Council oversight, without Council restrictions, without Council interference. The last human ship left Council space exactly 42 days after Resolution 7749 was passed. Behind them they left empty worlds and silent monuments. Ahead of them lay unknown space and uncertain futures. But every human on every ship felt the same thing. Not fear, not despair, but determination. They would survive. They would adapt. They would build something new. And someday the Council would regret forcing them to leave. 3 months passed after the last human ship disappeared from Council sensors. The Galactic Council convened again to discuss what they were now calling the human solution. Representatives from 200 species gathered in the Grand Chamber on Valenth Prime. The atmosphere was one of celebration and self-congratulation. They had removed a problematic species without firing a single shot. They considered this a masterpiece of diplomatic pressure. Ambassador Zrel spoke first, as he had been the primary architect of Resolution 7749. His translator rendered his words with obvious satisfaction. He explained that humanity had proven itself incapable of functioning within civilized galactic society. Their departure was therefore a gift to all peaceful species. The abandoned human worlds now represented enormous opportunities for expansion and resource extraction. He proposed immediate colonization efforts. Representative Venn of the Kessari Collective agreed enthusiastically. Her species had long desired access to Earth itself. The planet was remarkably suitable for Kessari biology. She submitted a formal claim for colonization rights. Within minutes, a dozen other species also submitted claims. The Council chamber filled with competing voices, all demanding their share of former human territory. High Counselor Draven listened to the chaos with growing unease. He was Valexian, and his species had longer lifespans than most Council members. He had seen conflicts and wars that the younger representatives only knew from history files. Something about the human departure troubled him deeply. He raised one of his silver manipulator limbs for attention. The chamber gradually fell silent. Draven spoke carefully. He asked whether anyone had considered where humanity had gone. He pointed out that humans possessed considerable military capabilities. Their fleet had not been destroyed. Their technology had not been confiscated. They had simply left. Should the Council not be concerned about what they might be planning? Should they not monitor where the humans had gone? Ambassador Zrel dismissed these concerns with a gesture that his translator conveyed as contemptuous. He explained that humans were fleeing into unmapped space beyond the galactic rim. That region was hostile and dangerous. There was no infrastructure, no support, no friendly ports. Humanity would face resource shortages, equipment failures, navigation hazards. They would be extinct within a generation, or they would return begging for mercy. Either way, the problem was solved. The Council voted on the colonization proposals. Earth was awarded to the Kessari Collective. Mars went to the Drethian Union. The other human colonies were distributed among various species based on political favors and economic considerations. Within days, the first alien colonists began arriving at former human worlds. They found exactly what the observers had reported. Empty cities, stripped facilities, nothing of value left behind. The Kisari who claimed Earth found the planet in perfect ecological condition but completely abandoned. They walked through silent cities where buildings stood empty. They found parks and streets and homes all vacant. Some Kisari found it disturbing. The humans had left so completely, so thoroughly, as if they had never intended to return. But most Kisari were simply pleased to have such a beautiful world. Tourism became popular among council species. Wealthy aliens paid to visit Earth and walk through human ruins. They took images of themselves standing in places like New York and London and Tokyo. They mocked the species that had abandoned such valuable real estate. They told each other stories about human arrogance and human failure. Earth became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when a species cannot adapt to civilized norms. But in the Council Intelligence Services, some analysts were not convinced. Kelm worked for the Prothean Union Intelligence Division. He was tasked with monitoring potential threats to Council security. He had been reviewing all available data on the human exodus. Something did not make sense to him. The departure had been too organized, too efficient, too thoroughly planned. Kelm compiled a detailed report. He noted that human ships had lifted off in perfect coordination across dozens of worlds. He pointed out that humans had stripped their settlements with military precision. He calculated that such an evacuation would require years of planning and preparation. This meant humans had been preparing to leave long before Resolution 7749 was passed. They had anticipated the Council's actions. They had been ready. Kelm took his report to his immediate superior. He argued that humanity had not fled in panic. They had executed a strategic withdrawal. They had left nothing behind because they did not want the Council to benefit from their departure. This suggested a level of planning that indicated they had a destination and a plan. The Council should be monitoring them. The Council should be concerned. His superior read the report and dismissed it entirely. She told Kelm he was being paranoid about a retreating species. She reminded him that the Council faced actual current threats that required attention. She ordered him to stop wasting resources on humans who were no longer relevant. She filed his report and marked it as low-priority speculation. Kelm returned to his station and said nothing more to his superiors. But he did not stop monitoring. He continued reviewing data from long-range sensors. He analyzed communication intercepts from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. And he began to notice something that troubled him greatly. There were signals, faint, encrypted, coming from far beyond the galactic rim, from the region where humanity had supposedly vanished. The signals used protocols that Kelm recognized from human networks. But the encryption was more sophisticated than anything humans had used before. The transmission pattern suggested a large organized network, multiple stations, regular communication schedules. This was not the signature of a dying civilization. This was the signature of a civilization building infrastructure. Kelm kept detailed private notes. He monitored the signals as carefully as he could without drawing attention. He watched as they gradually increased in strength and frequency over the following months. Something was happening out there in the darkness. Humanity was not dying. Humanity was growing. Meanwhile, the Council continued to prosper. Former human territories were being exploited efficiently. Mineral resources were being extracted. Agricultural worlds were being settled. Trade routes were being established. The galactic economy grew stronger without humans causing complications. The Council members congratulated themselves regularly on how well their solution had worked. Ambassador Zarel became the Council expert on managing difficult species. He gave speeches about the human situation. He explained his diplomatic strategy. He taught younger ambassadors how to use economic and political pressure instead of military force. He became famous across Council space as the person who had solved the human problem without firing a single shot. Only High Counselor Draven remained unconvinced. He was old enough to remember other species that had been underestimated. He remembered conflicts that had started because someone assumed their opponent was defeated. He quietly ordered his own intelligence staff to monitor for any signs of human activity. But even his staff found nothing definite. Just empty space where humans had disappeared. Just silence where there should have been signals. The silence should have been a warning. Species do not simply vanish without a trace. Entire civilizations do not dissolve into nothing. but the Council was too pleased with itself to notice. They were too satisfied with their victory to see the danger. They had taken everything from humanity. They had driven them into exile. They had claimed their worlds and mocked their memory. And they assumed this would have no consequences. They assumed humanity would simply fade away into history. They assumed wrong. 10 years passed in what seemed like peaceful prosperity for the Galactic Council. Former human territories continued to generate wealth for their new owners. The Kessari thrived on Earth. Trade flourished across Council space. The aggressive, unpredictable humans had faded into memory. They became a story that elder species told to newly inducted members. A cautionary tale about the importance of accepting civilized norms and Council authority. But small problems were beginning to appear at the edges of Council space. Ships started disappearing near the outer rim territories. At first it was just 1 or 2 vessels. Cargo freighters carrying raw materials, small passenger transports on remote routes. The losses were statistically insignificant. Space was dangerous. Accidents happened. The Council authorities blamed pirates or navigation errors or system malfunctions. Then more ships disappeared. Always near the outer rim. Always in the region closest to where humanity had supposedly vanished. A mining vessel with a crew of 40. A research station that went silent. A patrol ship that failed to report. The Council could no longer dismiss the pattern. Something was happening out there in the darkness beyond their borders. Various theories circulated among Council members. Some believed it was indeed pirate activity. Others suggested unknown spatial hazards. A few wondered about hostile alien species from beyond mapped space. Almost no one mentioned humans. After 10 years of silence, most Council members had genuinely forgotten about them. Those few who remembered assumed humans were long dead or reduced to scattered survivors barely clinging to existence. Far beyond the galactic rim, in a region called the Perseus Arm, humanity had indeed been struggling, but they had not been dying. They had been building. Captain Jake Morrison was now Fleet Admiral of the Human Concordat. The title sounded grand, but the reality had been brutally difficult. Humanity had fled to one of the most hostile regions of known space. The Perseus Arm was filled with gravitational anomalies, rogue planets, unstable stars, regions of space that made navigation dangerous and colonization nearly impossible. The first 2 years had been catastrophic. 3 entire colony ships were lost to navigation errors. 2 settled worlds suffered equipment failures that killed thousands before rescue arrived. Food shortages threatened multiple settlements. Medical supplies ran critically low. Children died from diseases that could have been easily treated in Council space. There were moments when Jake wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. But humanity did what humans have always done when faced with extinction. They adapted. They innovated. They survived. Engineers designed new navigation systems that could handle the unstable space of the Perseus Arm. Scientists developed agriculture techniques that worked on marginal worlds. Doctors created new medical procedures using limited resources. Every challenge was met with human determination and creativity. Jake stood in his office on Bastion Station and reviewed the latest reports. Bastion was humanity's largest outpost, a massive orbital facility that served as military headquarters and civilian government center. Through his window, he could see dozens of ships moving in organized patterns: construction vessels, military patrol craft, cargo haulers, scout ships. 10 years ago, humanity had arrived here with nothing but what they could carry. Now they had built an entire civilization. Commander Kyle Bennett entered with updated production numbers. He was younger than Jake by 15 years, but had proven himself a capable officer. He brought up holographic displays showing statistics that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. Humanity now controlled 78 habitable worlds in the Perseus Arm. They had established mining operations on hundreds of asteroids and moons. They had built shipyards capable of producing vessels that rivaled anything in Council space. Kyle highlighted the military production numbers. Humanity now possessed 47 capital ships. These were not the vessels they had brought from Council space. Those older ships had been retired or stripped for parts. The new fleet was something entirely different. Human engineers had spent 10 years developing technology without Council oversight, without safety regulations, without restrictions on weapons development, without any limitations except what physics would allow. The new human warships were faster than Council vessels. Their reactors generated more power. Their weapons hit harder. Their armor was more resilient. They incorporated design principles that violated every council military convention. They were built by a species that knew they might have to fight for survival. That made them dangerous in ways council militaries could not match. Jake studied the numbers with satisfaction. He asked Kyle about intelligence from council space. Kyle's expression darkened as he pulled up those reports. The council had grown comfortable and complacent. They believed humanity was extinct or irrelevant. Some species were pushing more aggressively into former human territories. There was discussion in the council about declaring all human technology public domain, since humans were no longer present to defend their intellectual property rights. This angered Jake more than almost anything else the council had done. It was not enough that they had driven humanity into exile. Now they wanted to steal human innovations and claim them as their own. They wanted to profit from the knowledge and creativity of a species they had tried to destroy. They wanted to erase even the memory of human achievement. Jake made a decision that he had been considering for months. He told Kyle to begin Phase 2 of their strategic plan. It was time to remind the council that humanity still existed. It was time to show them what humans had become during 10 years of isolation and struggle. It was time to teach them that driving humanity away had not solved their problem. It had created a much bigger one. Governor Helen Price joined the meeting to discuss the political implications. She had aged visibly during the 10 years of exile. Leading civilian government in such harsh conditions had been exhausting. But she had never wavered in her support for their mission. She had kept human society functioning even during the darkest times. She had maintained hope when many others had lost it. Helen listened to Jake's proposal and nodded slowly. She understood what he was planning. She knew it would mean the end of their peaceful isolation. Once they revealed themselves to the council, there would be consequences. There might be war. But she also knew they could not hide forever. And the council needed to learn that humanity would not be erased from history, would not be forgotten, would not allow their legacy to be stolen. The three leaders agreed on the plan. They would begin with small demonstrations of force. They would intercept council ships that ventured too close to human space. They would make it clear that the Perseus arm now belonged to humanity. They would show strength without committing to full war. Unless the council forced their hand, Jake issued orders to the fleet. Selected ships would begin patrol operations along the border with council space. They would monitor for intruders. They would intercept any vessels that entered what humanity now claimed as their territory. They would send a message that could not be ignored. Humanity had departed in silence 10 years ago, but they would not remain silent any longer. The first opportunity came 3 weeks later. A Corthan mining fleet crossed into the Perseus arm without authorization. The Corthans were the same species whose ambassador had celebrated humanity's departure. Their mining vessels were harvesting resources from asteroids that humanity now claimed. They ignored the fact that this was no longer unclaimed space. They assumed no one would challenge them so far from council territory. They were wrong. 6 human warships appeared from faster-than-light travel and surrounded the mining fleet. The Corthan captains were shocked. They had believed humans were extinct. They did not recognize the ship designs. They did not understand the weapons they were facing. When they refused to withdraw, the humans demonstrated their new capabilities with devastating efficiency. The mining fleet ceased to exist in less than 20 minutes. News of the Corthan mining fleet's destruction reached the Galactic Council 3 weeks after the incident. The delay was intentional. The humans had allowed one ship to escape. That single vessel carried a message back to council space. The message was simple and direct. It stated that the Perseus arm now belonged to humanity. Any further intrusions would be met with lethal force. The next violation would receive no mercy and no survivors. Ambassador Zrel stood before the council and demanded immediate military action. His species had lost 40 ships and over 2,000 crew members. He insisted this was an act of war. He claimed humans had obviously been hiding in deep space planning aggression against peaceful council members. He called for a massive military response to crush this threat before it could grow stronger. High Counselor Draven listened to Zrel's demands with growing concern. He had been warning about humanity for 10 years. His concerns had been dismissed. His intelligence reports had been ignored. Now the situation was exactly as he had feared. Humanity had not died in exile. They had grown stronger. But Draven also knew that rushing into military conflict was dangerous. He urged caution and proposed sending a diplomatic mission first. The council debated for 2 days. Some members agreed with Zrel and wanted immediate military action. Others supported Draven and preferred diplomatic contact. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The council would send a diplomatic ship to make contact with humanity. The ship would carry Ambassador Senna, who was known as the council's most skilled negotiator. She would attempt to resolve the situation peacefully. But the council would also begin assembling a military fleet in case diplomacy failed. The Pride of Valenth departed 3 weeks later, carrying Ambassador Senna and her diplomatic staff. The ship was unarmed, as was traditional for diplomatic missions. It broadcast peace signals on all frequencies. It requested permission to enter human space for negotiations. The response came quickly. Humanity granted permission and provided coordinates for a meeting location. Bastion Station. Senna arrived at Bastion and felt immediate shock at what she saw. The station was enormous, larger than any civilian facility in Council space. It was clearly both a military headquarters and a civilian city. Thousands of ships moved around it in organized patterns. Construction facilities worked continuously on new vessels. Defense platforms surrounded the station in multiple layers. This was not the desperate refugee settlement she had expected. This was an organized military power. The diplomatic meeting took place in a conference room that reflected human efficiency rather than grandeur. The room was functional and austere. No decorations, no comfortable furniture, just a large table and chairs and display screens. Admiral Jake Morrison entered wearing a military uniform that showed 10 years of hard service. Governor Helen Price accompanied him in civilian clothing that was equally practical. Both humans looked older than their files suggested. Life in the Perseus Arm had clearly been difficult. Senna opened with formal greetings and expressions of council concern about recent hostilities. She explained that the council wished to avoid conflict. She outlined what she considered a generous offer. Humanity could return to council space. They would be granted their original 12 systems. All they had to do was acknowledge council authority and submit to standard regulatory oversight. The council would forgive the attack on the Corthan fleet if humans agreed to these reasonable terms. Jake and Helen looked at each other. Then Jake smiled, but there was nothing friendly in the expression. He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the table. The display showed star maps of the Perseus Arm, dozens of human settlements, hundreds of industrial facilities, thousands of ships, a civilization that had grown from nothing in just 10 years. Jake spoke in a calm voice that somehow carried more threat than anger would have. He explained what humanity had built since leaving council space. He listed numbers that made Senna's blood run cold. 78 settled worlds, 47 capital ships with 30 more under construction, industrial capacity that rivaled major council species, military technology that surpassed anything in council arsenals, and a population that was growing again after years of hardship. Helen added that the council had offered humanity 12 systems a decade ago.
Humanity had taken 80 systems on their own.
They had claimed an entire region of space that the council had considered worthless. They had turned that wasteland into a thriving civilization without council help or council permission. They were not refugees anymore. They were a sovereign power. Jake changed the display to show images of human military capabilities. Weapons that violated every council convention on warfare, ship designs that ignored safety regulations, tactical doctrines that would be considered illegal in civilized space. He explained that humanity had spent 10 years developing these capabilities. They had been driven into an environment where survival required innovation, where staying within council rules would have meant extinction, so they had abandoned those rules entirely. Senna tried to maintain her diplomatic composure, but she was genuinely frightened. These humans were not the species the council remembered. They had changed. They had become harder, more dangerous. She asked what humanity wanted. What would satisfy them? What would prevent war between their people? Helen answered in a voice that was quiet but absolutely firm. She said humanity wanted recognition of their sovereignty over the Perseus Arm. They wanted the council to acknowledge human claims to their current territory. They wanted all former human colonies within council space returned to human control. They wanted Earth back. And they wanted guarantees that the council would never again try to restrict or limit human expansion. Senna protested that these demands were impossible. The Council could not simply hand over occupied territories. Species had settled on former human worlds. They had invested resources. They had established homes. The Council could not force them to leave. This would create massive political problems within Council space. Jake leaned forward and his expression became cold. He said the Council had forced millions of humans to leave their homes 10 years ago. The Council had not worried about political problems then. Human families had abandoned Earth. Human children had died during the Exodus. Human settlements had failed in hostile space. The Council had caused all of that suffering without hesitation. Now they would face the consequences. He activated another display showing something that made Senna gasp. Human ships positioned throughout Council space. Stealth vessels that had been observing Council activities for months. Scout ships that had mapped defensive positions. Intelligence assets that had infiltrated communications networks. Humanity knew where every major Council military base was located. They knew shipping routes. They knew industrial centers. They knew everything they would need to know if war came. Jake explained that humanity did not want war. But they were prepared for it. They had spent 10 years preparing for exactly this possibility. They knew they could not match the Council's total military strength. But they did not need to. They only needed to make war too costly for the Council to sustain. And they were confident they could do that. He pointed out that the Council fleet would have to travel far from their supply lines to attack human space. Every engagement would cost the Council resources they could not easily replace. Meanwhile, human forces would be fighting close to their own bases, close to their own supplies, in space they knew intimately. The strategic advantage was entirely with humanity. Helen added the political dimension. She explained that the Council was an alliance of 200 species. Those species had different interests, different priorities, different levels of commitment. How many of them would be willing to sustain heavy casualties in a war against humanity? How long would the alliance hold together when Council members started losing ships and crew? How stable was the Council, really? Senna realized she was not conducting a negotiation. She was receiving an ultimatum. These humans had thought through every aspect of the situation. They had prepared for every possibility. They were not desperate refugees hoping for mercy. They were a military power dictating terms. She asked for time to bring these proposals back to the Council for consideration. Jake agreed, but he set conditions. The Council had 30 days to respond. If they rejected human demands, then humanity would begin military operations. Not against the Council directly, against any species that currently occupied former human territory. Human ships would blockade those worlds. Human forces would make it impossible for current occupants to remain. They would force the Council to either abandon those territories or commit to full war. Senna departed Bastion Station with recordings and data files. She had arrived expecting to negotiate with desperate refugees. She was leaving after being threatened by a confident military power. The trip back to Council space felt much longer than the trip out. She spent the entire journey trying to figure out how to present this situation to the Council, how to make them understand how drastically they had miscalculated. The Galactic Council rejected humanity's demands within 2 weeks. The vote was not unanimous, but the majority ruled. Ambassador Zarel led the opposition to any compromise. He argued that accepting human demands would show weakness. It would encourage other species to defy Council authority. The Council could not allow humans to dictate terms. They had to respond with overwhelming force to restore order and demonstrate power. High Counselor Draven voted against military action, but he was outvoted. The Council authorized the largest military fleet in galactic history. 200 species contributed ships and resources. The combined fleet numbered over 3,000 vessels. It included everything from small patrol craft to massive dreadnoughts. The Council members were confident this force would crush human resistance quickly and decisively. Admiral Czar of the Valexian Grand Fleet was given command. He was considered one of the finest military minds in Council space. He had won victories against pirates and rebels. He had maintained peace along contested borders. He reviewed the intelligence on human capabilities and felt confident. Yes, the humans had advanced technology. Yes, they had prepared defensive positions, but they were vastly outnumbered. The mathematics of warfare were simple. Superior numbers would prevail. The Council fleet departed for the Perseus Arm with great ceremony. Politicians gave speeches about restoring order. News services covered the departure as a historic moment. Citizens across council space were told this would be a short campaign. The humans would surrender when they saw the size of the force arrayed against them. Council authority would be restored. The human problem would be solved permanently this time. What followed would be remembered as the Perseus War, though it barely lasted 2 months. The first engagement occurred at the edge of the Perseus Arm, where human scout ships detected the approaching Council fleet. Admiral Czar sent forward elements to probe human defenses. Those ships encountered human vessels that were faster and more maneuverable than anything in the Council arsenal. The engagement was brief and brutal. The Council lost 16 ships. The humans lost none. Czar analyzed the battle data with growing concern. Human weapons ignored shields that Council technology relied on. Their ships could accelerate at rates that would kill most Council species. Their tactics were aggressive to the point of recklessness. They fought like they had absolutely nothing to lose. This was not the disciplined warfare Czar was accustomed to. This was something primal and terrifying. The second engagement went worse. Czar committed a full battle group thinking superior numbers would overcome human technical advantages. But the humans did not fight fair. They used asteroids for cover. They launched missiles from unexpected angles. They targeted support vessels instead of warships. They destroyed supply ships and repair facilities. They crippled the battle group's ability to sustain operations and then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The third engagement was not really a battle at all. It was an ambush. Human ships had been waiting in a debris field that masked their presence. When the Council fleet entered the area, the humans struck from all sides simultaneously. The Council lost 47 ships in the opening minutes. The attack was so sudden and coordinated that most ships never had a chance to return fire. The survivors retreated in disorder. Admiral Czar sent desperate reports back to the Council. He explained that human tactics were unlike anything he had trained for. They did not follow standard military doctrine. They did not respect conventions of warfare. They struck from unexpected directions. They disappeared before he could respond. They targeted his supply lines instead of engaging his warships directly. Every engagement cost him more than he could afford while human casualties remained minimal. The Council ordered Czar to press forward regardless of losses. They could not accept defeat. They could not allow humans to defy their authority. Czar followed orders even though he knew he was leading his forces into disaster. Over the next 3 weeks, the Council fleet was systematically destroyed. Not in one climactic battle, but in dozens of small engagements where humans held every advantage. Captain Sarah Lewis commanded the human forces that struck deepest into Council territory. She was younger than most fleet officers, but had proven herself ruthless and brilliant. She led a strike force that penetrated deep behind Council lines while their main fleet was engaged in the Perseus Arm. Her target was not civilian populations, it was infrastructure. Sarah's ships emerged from faster-than-light travel inside the Valenth Prime system, the Council capital. The heart of galactic civilization, her forces struck at military shipyards and supply depots. They destroyed communication relays and sensor networks. They disabled defensive platforms with surgical precision. The entire attack lasted less than 40 minutes. Then the human ships vanished before Council reinforcements could arrive. But before leaving, Sarah broadcast a message on every frequency. Her voice was calm and professional as she spoke. She explained that humanity had demonstrated their capability to strike at the heart of Council space. They could have targeted civilians, but they had chosen not to. They could have destroyed cities, but they had struck only military targets. This was a warning. This was humanity showing restraint. But if the Council continued the war, then there would be no more restraint. The message included coordinates to 17 Council worlds. Worlds belonging to species that had contributed forces to the invasion fleet. At each of those worlds, human ships were now in orbit. Not attacking, just waiting, just demonstrating that humanity could reach any Council world whenever they wanted. That no world in Council space was beyond human reach. That the Council had no way to protect their home systems from human strikes. Panic spread across Council space. Species that had been confident in victory now feared for their home worlds. Politicians who had called for war now demanded peace. The alliance that had seemed so strong began to fracture as individual species prioritized their own survival. Ambassador Zrel found himself increasingly isolated as other Council members blamed him for leading them into disaster. High Counselor Draven called for an emergency session. He had opposed the war from the beginning. Now he argued forcefully that the Council had to accept reality. Humanity was not a minor species to be bullied. They were a major military power. They had proven capable of striking anywhere in Council space. Continuing the war would only lead to more losses. The Council had to negotiate. The debate was bitter and emotional. Some members still wanted to fight. Others were desperate for peace. Eventually, pragmatism prevailed over pride. The Council voted to request negotiations. They sent messages to human commanders offering to discuss terms. The response came from Admiral Jake Morrison himself. He agreed to negotiate, but only after the Council fleet withdrew completely from the Perseus Arm. The Council complied. The Treaty of Bastion was negotiated over 3 months. The terms were harsh but not vindictive. Humanity claimed sovereignty over the entire Perseus Arm region. All former human colonies within Council space would be returned to human administration. Earth and its surrounding systems would be evacuated by current occupants within 1 year. In exchange, humanity agreed not to expand into established Council territory. They would respect the sovereignty of species that had not participated in the invasion. The treaty included security provisions. The Council agreed to never again attempt to restrict human expansion or settlement. Human ships would have free passage through Council space. Human traders would receive most favored nation status, and any species that attacked humanity would receive no Council protection. These terms effectively recognized humanity as an equal power rather than a subordinate species. Ambassador Zrel did not attend the signing ceremony. He had been removed from his position and returned to his homeworld in disgrace. His political career was finished. He had promised the Council an easy victory and delivered catastrophic defeat. Other Council members would spend years trying to explain to their citizens how they had lost a war to a species they had thought extinct. On the day the treaty was signed, Ambassador Senna found herself alone with Admiral Jake Morrison for a few minutes. She had to ask the question that troubled her. How had humanity become so powerful in merely 10 years? How had they built an entire military civilization from nothing? How had they defeated a force 3 times their size? Jake considered his answer carefully. He explained that the Council had made a critical mistake. They had thought restricting humanity would weaken them. They had thought driving them away would eliminate the threat. But they had forgotten something fundamental about human nature. Humans were most dangerous when cornered, when threatened, when forced to adapt or die. He explained that the Council had given humanity a common enemy that unified their entire species. They had given them a purpose. They had forced them to innovate without restriction or oversight. They had created the perfect conditions for humans to become what they had always been capable of being. A species that thrived on adversity, that grew stronger through struggle, that refused to accept defeat no matter the odds. Jake gestured toward the viewport where human ships patrolled in perfect formation. He told Senna that humanity had built their civilization in the Perseus Arm without Council help. Without Council app.